Our 1982 CJ7 has been sitting in the barn for a few years with a very sick engine. We've decided that it's time to get her running again. So after a quick pressure wash, we set about putting smaller tires on so that we could fit it into the shop. If you don't know the history of this CJ, take a look at our CJ introduction video, where we explain how we got the Jeep and some of the changes we've made over the last few years. We're going to be doing a multi-part series, where we repair the engine, upgrade a few things, and get this Jeep running again. Please make sure to subscribe and ring that bell to make sure that you are up to date with the latest releases. With the throttle pedal jammed open a little bit to get the idle speed higher, we managed to get her running again. You can hear how rough she sounds as we pull her into the shop.
Well, we've got the Jeep in the garage now, so it's time to start taking out the engine. But before we start, there's a couple of things that we want to go through and check that'll make our lives a little bit easier as we go along. So the first thing that we did was we took out this computer, which runs the engine, and replaced it with the one from our XJ. Now we know the one from the XJ does run this Jeep because we've used it when we were busy doing our wiring harness and for our first startups. So we replaced it and put this one into the XJ. And we had no problem running the XJ on this, and we had the problem was still on this Jeep when we put the XJ's computer in here. So we know that it's unlikely that it is the computer. The next thing that we've done is we took out this coil rail and replaced it into the XJ and put the XJ's coil rail in. So this coil rail is actually the one from the XJ, which we know is working. And the one that we took out of here is running just fine in our XJ. We use it as our daily driver. So we know it's not the coil rail. One more thing that we want to check is check any codes, and if you go ahead and look over here, no codes are stored in the module, so the ECU is happy that it can see all of its sensors. So it is still a mystery as to what exactly is wrong. Ideally we would take the cover off and see if there's any damage on the top end, but unfortunately there's a bolt way back there that we just cannot get to past the firewall. So to get to this cover off, we're going to have to at least pull the engine forward, and we might as well take it out. Remember that we've had low oil pressure right since we got this engine from the junkyard. We've put a Melling high volume oil pump in to try and help with that, but it's still got low oil pressure when we're at idle. So the engine is going to come out no matter what. The next thing that we want to do is take out the coil rail and remove the spark plugs. And then we're going to put a scope inside of it and see if there's any damage on the top of the cylinder heads.
The whole engine was still covered with mud and sand from when we were stuck, so we used the shop vac to clean off as much as possible to prevent it going into the cylinders.
Right, with the spark plugs now out, we can take our camera, put it inside each cylinder, see what the inside of each cylinder looks like. And here we can see the valve, which is open, and just past the valve, top of the cylinder head. You don't see any damage on there. So we've borrowed this cylinder leak detector kit from a friend of ours, and what you do is you connect it up to shop air and you supply air pressure onto the cylinder when it's at top dead center, and then you start looking for leakages. The literature here explains where you can go and have a look for it. We've got this in a compression tester, but we already know that we've got an issue, so what we're trying to find out is where we should be looking for our issue. Right, so with the air on, you can see that we've got some leakage out of the crankcase. You can hear it coming out there, and right when we put it in, I can feel a slight bit of air coming out of this next cylinder. So I'm going to assume that we have a damaged cylinder head. In fact, I can feel the air pressure building up inside of there. So we definitely have got air leaking from cylinder 2 to cylinder number, from cylinder number 1 to cylinder number 2.
After all the checking we had done, we had only been able to ascertain that we seemed to have a leak between cylinders 1, 2 and 3, which indicates a bad head gasket or a bad head, and so it was time to start taking out the engine. To take out an engine, there's a multitude of connectors, hoses and connections that need to be undone and carefully moved out of the way. Won't bore you with all the details, but we undid all of these and then got ready to lift out the engine. We bolted a chain to the front and the rear of the block and then looped it so we could hook it to the engine hoist. The engine hoist couldn't fit under the axle, so we aired up the tires to give us a little bit more clearance. We took up the strain on the engine hoist and then pried loose the bolts from their mounts. We finally were able to lift the engine out of the CJ.
And with that, we've got the engine out of the engine bay, and it is now laying here on the floor. Transmission, engine. So we can start. We now need to separate the transmission from the transfer case.
Removing a manual transmission from the engine block can be a bit tricky, but with some pry bars it comes off fairly easily. With the transmission out the way, we could take off the clutch, after removing the flywheel bolts, we could take the flywheel off the crank. With the flywheel out the way, we mounted the engine onto the engine stand.
Alright, so we've got the engine on the engine stand now. So I think what we're going to do real quick is just open the valve cover and see what we can see inside of there. Right, so with the cover off, we can see there's nothing major wrong actually on the head. All the springs are still there. All the rockers are still there. So still a mystery as to what's wrong. We're going to call it today, and we'll get back to the teardown at a later stage.